The one with Rachel's new dress is the 18th episode of the 4th season of Friends. This is directed by Gail Mancuso, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in the episode and share some thoughts. And I've grouped the episode into 3 main parts of the narrative, and I don't know which part is my favourite. I feel like it's actually the part with Phoebe, Chandler and Joy, but I'm not 100% sure. But I will start with Ross and Emily because I have the fewest notes there, and then Rachel and Joshua, and then Phoebe, Chandler and Joy. And Ross and Emily are spending time together. Emily is getting ready to leave and go back to London. Susan and Carol come over and we find out that Susan's actually going to London. And Emily says that she'll show her around, she'll go to a show with her, and then later on, Emily phones Ross up and says that they're having a great time. That's brilliant. No, not if you're Ross. Ross begins to worry that his girlfriend is a lesbian. And in his defence, this experience is not unlike what he went through with Carol when Carol started spending time with Susan. So while one could argue that he's overreacting and thinking too much into it, he has been through this before. And actually, one of my favourite moments in the whole episode is when Ross is panicking about this and the others are trying to reassure him, and then Phoebe just turns around and says, yeah, definitely, I don't like the name Ross. Which, because Ross hasn't been privy to the conversation with Chandler and Joy, must have been so random, and it's so funny in his expression, the way he reacted. I always enjoy that. And it actually gets quite thought-provoking because later on, Phoebe actually suggests to Ross that Carol really messed him up, and we actually get some really good insight here. And Monica and Rachel join in on the conversation, and they realise that Carol and what happened with Susan turned Ross into this crazy, jealous, paranoid person. And I think that's actually kind of deep. I've never really thought about that before. Obviously, what Carol did, cheating on Ross, that's obviously going to have a negative effect, but I never really considered just how deeply it might affect his future relationships. And here we really see how that is the case. And then as Rachel mentions, it seemed to have affected his behaviour with Mark and how he treated Mark, or I guess treated Rachel because of Mark. And it's really fascinating. And I thought that was something that's definitely worth considering if you're in a similar situation to Ross and you find yourself feeling the way Ross does. Maybe try and work out what the root of that is if you don't know. Definitely found that to be really interesting. We then have Rachel and Joshua, and she's got this new dress, and Monica is making dinner on behalf of Rachel. Josh comes over, everything's going really well, and then the birds are there, and we learn that Josh is actually really scared of farm birds. I'm with him. I'm completely with him on this. I do not like being around birds. Anything that's bigger than a robin, other than owls, I like owls, but anything bigger than a robin I'm not a fan of, and I completely understand. But Joshua takes it a step further, and even when the birds are in the other apartment again, he's still scared. So they decide to go to Josh's parents' apartment because his apartment is being renovated, they're working on it, so he goes to his parents because they're currently out of town, and they can have a nice relaxing bird-free dinner there. What's the problem? Well, just as Rachel gets changed into her new dress, which I think is easily one of Rachel's most iconic outfits, if I can use that word, Josh's parents come home early. And this is Pat Crowley and John Bennett Perry. And it is worth noting there that John Bennett Perry is the father of Matthew Perry, which is pretty awesome. And they see Rachel in the dress, and she quite quickly points out she works in fashion, she's wearing this as a kind of experiment. Fair enough, I think that was absolutely fine. And then they suggest they all go out to eat, and Rachel doesn't think to get changed. She could have so easily saved the situation by just using a tiny bit of common sense and saying, okay, you don't have a positive reaction to this dress, clearly people aren't ready for it, which is kind of what she said, but then proceeded to go out to dinner in the dress. Why didn't she get changed? Obviously, we wouldn't have got some of the comedy that came after that, but I just don't understand how anybody could be in this situation and not get changed. So I don't necessarily think Rachel was thinking things through. I don't necessarily believe that this is what anybody else in the situation would have done. But nevertheless, we do get a decent anecdote from Rachel later on about how things basically went badly in the restaurant. And then we come to Phoebe, Chandler and Joy. And we have one of my favourite Alice moments. They're in Central Park. Phoebe has a drum because her guitar doesn't fit anymore. And Alice comes in and she explains how they want to name two of the babies, Leslie and Frank Jr. And Chandler says, wouldn't that be Frank the Third? And Alice turns around without missing a beat and says, don't get me started. And just the delivery of her line there was fantastic. Usually Alice is very soft and sickly sweet, but clearly this is something she's had a lot of issue with. And I just thought it was a really brilliant brief performance. And Phoebe is getting to name the third baby, which is so sweet, but also very much intense, because I, for one, would not want the responsibility of naming somebody else's child. But Phoebe seems pretty excited by it, initially suggests the name Cougar, and then Alice tells her to think about it, and Chandler and Joey suggest their names. And Phoebe starts to think about this, and they kind of give reasons for why they shouldn't have each other's name. Chandler says there'll never be a President Joey. I really hope one day there is a President Joey. I just googled it to see if Joe Biden was ever referred to as Joey, and apparently there's a picture book called Joey, the Story of Joe Biden, and I guess that means he was called Joey as a child. I don't know. If anybody can say anything about that, please feel free to let me know. But certainly we could argue that there is a President Joey if he was ever called Joey as a child. I don't know, but either way, that's the point that Chandler decides to make. And Joey says that Chandler isn't even a real name. It's kind of like Chandelier, but it's not. It's a stupid non-name, which is kind of a harsh thing to say to somebody. But the name Chandler does actually come from Chandelier. So Joey was actually kind of right about that one. It is kind of like Chandelier because it derives from Chandelier. And I have to say, I think Chandler is an absolutely delightful name. I really like the name Chandler. But they decide to call him Gene, which I feel like he really suits the name Gene. This is because he wants to change his name because he has, in Joey's words, a stupid non-name. And they suggest, Phoebe and Joey suggest Gene, and he kind of suits it. He suggests Mark. Chandler suggests Mark, which I think he really suits. And then somebody suggests Barney, which I also think he suits. It's quite bizarre. He suits all of these names. And ultimately, he's putting himself down so much that Phoebe decides she'll name the third baby Chandler. And as soon as Phoebe leaves the room, we learn that it's a trick. We have this brilliant performance of Matthew Perry turning around, pointing at Joey and laughing, cackling almost. And Joey realises exactly what Chandler has done. He's done all of this just to get Phoebe to call the baby Chandler. And I don't love it because I did feel really sorry for Chandler. And I don't want to feel sorry for somebody who's doing it just to play a trick. But at the same time, he got what he wanted. And Chandler is such a lovely name. So definitely worked well for Chandler. Didn't really work well for Rachel in this episode. And, well, things kind of worked well enough for Ross. I would like to know how much Emily is spending on flights at this point because she comes back with Susan. And I don't believe Susan's been away for very long. So Emily must be going back and forth to London a lot. And as somebody who's just booked flights to the States, they are not cheap. And granted, this was in the 90s, but I'm pretty sure they weren't very cost effective then either. So I don't know how much Emily is spending on this relationship, but it must be a lot. That is not a concern for me, though. The one with Rachel's new dress is a really great episode with some really great moments and definitely one that I'm sure I'll always really thoroughly enjoy.